Hello and welcome to this edition of the Google Firestarters podcast. I'm Neil Perkin, the curator of Google Firestarters and the founder of consultancy business Only Dead Fish. For the uninitiated, Firestarters was a quarterly series of live events that we ran at Google, focusing on the areas of challenge and opportunity in the advertising and the media industry. So we ran almost 60 live events over 8 years. But we've now pivoted to virtual, of course, like many things in the pandemic, and are running this series of short podcasts. So in this series, we'll be interviewing some of the most well-respected people in our industry and asking them the same 5 questions each time. So we'll be asking them, what's the best thing that you've learned in your career to date? What's the biggest mistake that you've made in your career, and what did you learn from it? Then what is your key insight around how marketing and advertising is changing? And what's your key prediction for the future of planning, marketing, or the industry? And then finally, what question do you wish that I'd asked you, and what's your answer to it? So Firestarters has always been about hearing from the most interesting and interested people in the industry, and today's guest is no exception to that. Delighted to have Richard Huntington, the Chairman and Chief Strategy Officer for Saatchi Saatchi Group London. So Richard, would you care to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Neil. You sort of introduced me there. I'm Richard Huntington. I'm Chairman and Chief Strategy Officer of Saatchi London. But I always really describe myself. I'm a planner. That's my trade. That's what I love doing. That's what I still do. And I've been at it now for about 30 years. It's odd. You never really set off to have a career, and you look back and go, my goodness, I have actually been doing this for quite a long time. That's and I work across our clients in the agency, but I have a particular focus around BT and EE.
Fantastic, good. Well, welcome. And so as you know, we've got 5 questions which I'm going to ask you. And the first question is around the best thing that you've learned in your career to date. So this was a question actually we posed as part of a Firestarters event we did about 4 or 5 years ago now. Very popular event, that one, and we had some fascinating answers to it. I think actually, if I may, just because we're being sort of reflective, looking back over your career. So the last, where did you actually start your career? Where was your first gig in the industry?
Yeah, my first agency was a direct marketing agency that's long since gone, called DDM. And having spectacularly failed to get into any of the agencies I'd heard of in the milk round, as we used to call it, I spotted an ad in the Media Guardian on a Monday for this direct marketing agency that was looking for graduate trainees for the first time. And so I started off there, and I've had a very simple and straightforward, some would say overly monogamous approach to agency life. Literally, I've worked in 5 agencies in my entire career. I've always been put in mind of that John Peel, the legendary Radio 1 DJ, John Peel, when asked why he'd been at Radio 1 for so long, he said it's either an admirable commitment to public service broadcasting or a lack of talent and ambition. And I never really know whether I am super loyal to amazing organisations or just can't be asked to move. That's about 5 agencies in 30 years, which I think is probably a little bit unusual. Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe these days, I guess it is. But so let's think about that career and that first question. So the first question of our 5 about the best thing that you think you've learned over those 30 years. So what do you think that is?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to be a planner and not answer the brief. No, I think there's a big philosophical piece of learning, and then there are lots of little practical things, and in lots of ways, I think it is the practical advice that is more helpful and directional in lots of ways. I remember learning from Adrian Vickers, one of the founders of Abbott Mead Vickers, fortunate to have worked for in the 90s. He used to have this this thing about Richard always take yes for an answer. He's absolutely paranoid about the way that planners, can get a yes out of a client and then subsequently unsell the work because we go on pontificating until the client actually not sure any longer. Or his co-founder Peter Mead, he had this. He used to say, just don't whatever you do, just don't call them punters. And I think what he was really meaning was, don't put this distance between you and the people that you're communicating with.
Okay.
I mean, Peter Mead was legendarily, one of those classic old stories of somebody who worked their way up from the post room, and I think that basic sort of idea around respect sort of solidified when I worked for Steve Henry at HHCL. He used to say to planners, all I really want you to do is to describe the audience in a way that makes me love and respect them. And still, when I read strategy documents or briefs where you just can't, you don't feel that sense of love and respect for the audience, it sort of makes me bristle. So I think there's been lots of little practical pieces of learning, but the big philosophical one I'm going to be decisive about, and I think that is, and it does lean into the Saatchi mantra of nothing's impossible, but I think I was at it. I'd started believing in it actually at HHCL, and I think that is that no problem, no commercial problem is unsolvable with enough creativity, imagination, and intelligence. I think that's my and guiding piece of learning, and that might sound a little bit glib and that's kind of easy to say. I genuinely think a mentality that or a mindset that turns up going, I bet I can solve this problem, as opposed to no one can possibly solve this problem, or people have tried solving this problem before and it's never worked. If I was to think about something like that was the guiding force behind what we did on Direct Line, which I think everybody would have said at the time, it's insane. You're not on a price comparison website. That's consumer behavior. You need to, the only way to solve the ailing fortunes of Direct Line at the time is get onto a price comparison website. And that kind of where it's, mindset that turned up. I just sort of went, bollocks to that. I bet we could figure out a way to unpick that consumer behavior. So I think that's the bit of learning. I have had nothing to do with this brand, but I really admire Sip Smith, and I think if you're as old as I am, you remember back to a time when people said, the white spirits business is all about vodka. It's over for gin. It's your granddad's drink. There's no future. It's all about vodka. And that probably would have held until about 10 years ago. And now I reflect that a couple of people just basically went, I refuse to accept that as any sort of settled will of the market. We're going to single-handedly revitalize the gym market to the point where that brand isn't just successful, that entire sector is successful. So I've rambled a bit there, but I think it's the people that show up thinking, I bet I could solve this, with enough creativity, imagination, intelligence, that's and that surely has got to be what this business is about.
Do you think, just following on from that, because I love the thought about nothing is unsolvable. Do you think there's a kind of a mindset that is a dominant or prevalent mindset in the industry? Do you see it in the people around you and the people that work in the industry now?
I'm not sure I see a culture that believes that you can get anything done. What I want to be specific about is that every brand and every business can take its destiny into its own hands, that there isn't some sort of settled will of the market, some guiding hand that has prescribed an outcome for your brand or business. And I think a lot of our industry is trying to find find the rules or the trends or the following wind that is dictating the future of your brand or category, as opposed to going, I just refuse to accept the settled will of the market, and I'll die trying, to change all that. So I think maybe there is just a bit more of a culture of trying to find out what the rules are, rather than ignoring the rules and just doing something else.
Yeah, I guess Sipsmith is quite a good example of that, isn't it? Because when you think about the price point of that, and how they have put themselves alongside premium gins and managed to create a brand which does that, it's quite amazing, really, when you think about what they
and now what I say, the big brewers, the big distillers that went, no, it's all about vodka. And we had that period where there was Grey Goose and Ciroc, and that was where all the energy was. I'm not a spirits expert at all, don't work in the category at the moment, and then a bunch of people just went, no, I'm going to and it's not just that Sipsmith is a successful brand, it's that all of those distillers are now buying or creating premium gin brands, and there's nothing more or less to that. I mean, I think there's something possibly to do with duty around small batch alcohol production or distilleries. So there was some sort of regulatory framework, but really it's about a bunch of people going, I bet we could make something out of this.
Yeah, brilliant, great. Okay, so we talked a bit there about some of the big lessons that you've had through your career. So let's think a bit about what was the biggest mistake that you've made in your career? So something that actually you learned a lot from yourself personally, and what did you learn from that? So what was the biggest mistake you think you made?
If I was to, at the level of what's the biggest mistake I've made in my career, I would categorically say it was not going to another market.
Yeah.
I can't. It's not a sort of mistake that goes, I learned loads from doing this thing, because in a sense it's a mistake of not doing something. But I think that and while I've done a lot of global strategy and global planning, I think not seeing the world innately from a different culture and feeling an outsider in that culture, and I do look with sort of envy at peers that have really done that, whether they've made a career being elsewhere or whether they've come back. So I think, hand on heart, and I would say I should have done that early 2000s. I think when HHCL was running out of steam as an agency, very sad and unfortunate end. Died young, leaving a beautiful corpse, as they said of Stiff Records. I think that's true of HHCL. Everybody's forgotten the work now, or everybody's forgotten the agency. Everybody remembers the work. But I think probably at that time I should have gone. At that time I would have thought either West Coast or maybe the beginnings of opening up China. I really regret that, to be honest. And it's one of those things. Is it too late? Is it too late? Am I too old?
Yeah. What do you think that would have done, though? I mean, it's either going to the US or to China. You mentioned there about being the outsider. So what do you think that would have done for you if you'd have done that at that time?
I think that sense of having to learn a culture in an environment where you are completely outside. And I wonder a little bit, I think we've just been talking about learning, and one of the big pieces of learning, I guess, that lots of people like me, perhaps you, are having to do at the moment, is to understand the nature of the innate privilege that I've been accorded by virtue of who I am, and I think I've always been slightly at home. And not having that level of discomfort, and I think I'm not going to necessarily tie these two together, but if I have another regret latterly, it's not having done more to have changed the composition of our business over what is now quite a long period of time. I think there's a fierce urgency of that now, but I mean, you know, those questions have been around for quite a long time. I do think those are my two principal regrets. And they're not so much mistakes. I mean, you know, I genuinely did pitching for a piece of Sega business in the mid 90s, did wander around holding forth about how Sony were never going to make it in the console market because Sony got no credibility in gaming, and PlayStation was a stupid name. I mean, I have made huge, but there are too many of them to count. Frankly, I think there's always a risk as a planner or strategist that I've had this phrase, which I love a lot, which is strong opinions lightly held. I do hold them lightly, but the risk about having strong opinions is you're wrong, you know?
Yeah. And so is there something about working in a different market, a different context, which actually brings more challenge to your opinions, makes you think in a different way, gives you
almost certainly. And if you're going to say your superpower or is the ability to think differently, to think in ways other people don't think, to get out of that sort of the tram lines of logic, then anything you can do to place yourself outside is, and there are lots of things that you have to move abroad, but if I look back, I think that's the thing. You know.
Yeah. Do you think, just a final question on this, but that point about perspectives and
Perspectives.
being able to take in lots of different inputs from lots of different sources, and there's quite a bit of discussion around potentially strategy planners reading the same things and maybe thinking a bit groupthink and so on. Do you think that's real? Is it?
Yes, without that, I mean, I would say I probably eschew reading, except your own books. You understand, but business books, and because. Largely because I'm lazy, but mainly because I sort of end up going, where's the advantage if I read? I guess there are some things that we all have to have got our heads around to do our job these days.
Yeah.
But I've always said that you're better off kind of reading weird shit than the latest sort of thing that's doing the rounds in the planning fraternity. And let's be really clear. I think one of the best and worst things that happened was the online planning community, because it was, I feel it was incredibly powerful for the mid 2000s when the initial blogging boom took off, because the generosity of the community, the planosphere, and the way that people who had previously had no access to thinking and other planners, they were the lone planners somewhere. The way that you could plug into this community was extraordinary. The downside of that possibly is that we have created this self-policing orthodoxy.
I think you started blogging about 2005, wasn't it? I think it was, and this was one of the first blogs I read, and I think I started blogging about a year after that. So let's sort of bring it now to how the industry is changing, and just thinking a bit about there's obviously a lot of change going on. So but the question number 3 is around your key insight for how marketing and advertising is really changing. What are you seeing from your perspective?
I think I'm more interested in the stuff that I think that's important to brands and businesses than I am necessarily in the way in which marketing and advertising is changing. I do find that a little bit sort of kind of narrow-minded obsession about the next thing. The stuff I'm much more interested in is how the ideas that we create and the brands that we build have greater impact within organizations, and the way in which marketing is a force for bringing new thinking and new perspectives into organizations, not simply as a way of expressing what the organization thinks about itself. I'm really interested in the crisis in capitalism at the moment, or a long-term crisis in capitalism. I'm quite interested in I think we've learned a load of the last few months about what it takes for organizations to genuinely show up in people's lives and make a difference, and how we learn from that. So it's more like, I don't want to be obtuse, but I think it's more like I have a bunch of things I find interesting, rather than grand sort of perspectives on the way that marketing and advertising is changing. And there are a lot of people in that space who do a great job at that. I think for me, it's a bit closer into, how do businesses need to change in order to survive and prosper, and what's marketing's role in all of that? Does that make any sense? It sounds really rambling when it comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, no, it does. And I'm interested in what you're saying there about marketing's impact within organizations. And there's this whole thing, of course, about every organization focused on customer experience, being more customer centric, and marketing really has always been the kind of voice of the customer, if you like. So do you think it's lost out in some ways by not really being that kind of connection through to the customer in all senses for an organization?
Yes, it's been often content to govern external communications, and not necessarily experience in all the meanings. I mean, every single way in which a customer experiences a product, service, or organization. It's not always been powerful in helping articulate and galvanize culture. And if we're working with BT at the moment, and that the organizational, it's going to be organizational change that ultimately moves that business forward. Like there are 106,000 people. Or if I think about, I work a lot with HSBC. That's 250,000 people. These organizations, things will happen when the people within that organization believe and belong. That's not necessarily something that marketing itself is always seen as on its doorstep as a priority. And then the other piece is, I think, we've often seen reputation being a sort of the preserve of corporate communications, rather than glued together part of this. So we talk a lot about an idea of a living business idea as opposed to a brand idea, but because I think I'm still of the belief, not always fashionable, that simple, straightforward ideas can galvanize and drive an organization, informing what it makes, how it behaves, what its reputation is, and what it says about itself. And maybe in marketing it's funny because I see these in quadrants classically. I would like you end up in the top right hand quadrant. Just think about external communication. I just wanted to. I do have an issue around customer centricity there. I mean, maybe you can help me on it. I've spent so long kind of going, yeah, absolutely. It's customer centricity, organizations being closer to the customer. And so I've started to realize what many organizations merely mean is we've developed a few personas and we've reorientated our engagement with people around customer journeys. They don't actually mean, this is my point about duty to serve. They don't actually mean, in what way does my organization have a duty to serve? That customer centricity seems to me to have ended up, maybe it always was, is this very narrow conversation.
Yes.
Whereas it really should be about putting the customer at the heart of everything. And that, if that isn't a CMO's job, I don't know what is.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels a bit like we're talking about stuff which has always been important to marketing. I mean, Peter Drucker said years ago about the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And it's just that whole thing, the way in which you're orienting the business, but it feels like somehow it's got a bit lost in language and, you know, all this talk of customer centricity without actually thinking about what it means for how you bring that to life. I was interested in your living business idea. It strikes me that that is something which, if you create meaning for people that work in the organization as well as for customers, that's got to be a win-win, isn't it? Is that what you mean by that idea of a living business idea?
I go as far as saying I think it's sort of marketing's birthright, which is to articulate the idea that can inform every way in which the organization touches customers, and you know, I do feel a little bit like often experience design and proposition development and product innovation benefits from having an idea to work to orientate itself around. Otherwise, you end up simply developing best practice or copying a competition, or just smoothing out the wrinkles. So I think it's actually it's a mantra about helping marketing go back to or re-inhabit the center of the conversation. It's not I'm not trying to claim a bigger role for marketing in the boardroom. I'm simply saying I think we can help because of the way that we think, and the way fundamentally marketing at best brings the outside into organizations.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we've been looking backwards a bit there. So let's take this into forwards now and think about the fourth question here, which is about predictions. So do you have a prediction for the future of either planning as a craft or marketing industry? You're welcome to take this in whichever direction you want, but let's look forwards. What's your prediction for where things are going?
So there are two things that I'm thinking about at the moment. They're a bit closer into the practice of planning and strategy. I think one is I'm really interested in the distinction between selling and salesmanship. I think that, and particularly at the moment, because it's very clear to me that as an industry we need to sell, and like our economies now depend on us lot getting back out there and selling stuff, because we are heading into the most horrendous economic situation. But I think it's a mistake to view it simply as the process of selling, because ultimately all you end up doing is putting all of your budget into conversion, outbidding everybody else for the same pool of customers that are ready to buy. Right. And we aren't focused enough on the process of salesmanship. So there are two conflicting quotes in my head. One is obviously the Ogilvy quote around "we sell or else." The other one is a beautiful definition of advertising from the early 20th century, which is salesmanship in print, which is obviously slightly technologically defined around print advertising. But I think that I want planning to understand the process of salesmanship and the art of salesmanship and the art of the sell, not simply how do I find some people to sell to. Yeah, I think they're different conversations, and a lot of that for me is about gluing back together. I mean, funnels are very unpopular conversations, but gluing the funnel back together that says that you don't have brand and product and conversion in separate silos run by different people in the organization, that you have a very clear idea about that process of salesmanship. It's slightly gendered, I know, I can't find a better word at the moment. So I'm really interested in that space.
What about the you mentioned the art of salesmanship? I mean, what do you mean by that?
I just sort of think that persuasion, we become very scientific about selling, and there's been huge benefit in doing that. I'll be really clear about that. But if I'm going to persuade you of something, and after all, our job it's got to be more than here is a bunch of people ready to buy a car, let's sell them a car. Our job has got to be, environmental concerns aside, why you should want to buy a car in the first place. Like, like salesmanship, that art of persuade. I can't describe it without using that word. It seems to me to be mercurial and mysterious and very human. How I sit in front of you as a salesperson and persuade you of my point of view. Does that?
Yeah.
I also think here's a totally different thing. I think in our narrow world of advertising, account handlers sell, but planners persuade. I think that may be the difference. Planners persuade clients to do things,
Right.
and I think that's the understanding how to persuade people. That art of persuasion still sounds very sort of 1950s, and I do have images of people doorstepping houses in suburban America, though of course David Ogilvy was an Argus salesman, wasn't he? I mean, that's why he knew how to do it. He'd gone around America selling Argus. I think it's a bit that I never had. Where is my Argus selling period? But so that's that understanding that it's become we're becoming too dependent on science to sell and not the art and craft of salesmanship.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we'll come to our final question here. So this is our kind of catch-all at the end, if you like. So what's the question that you wish that I'd asked you, and what's your answer to it?
Okay, I'm going to regret asking you, telling you this, I think, because I don't really wish you. I think one of the things I'm interested in is how do you stay relevant in an industry? Like, I think you might have said you've been doing this for 30 years. Like, there are talented, extraordinary people coming up. Why don't you just give up and wander off? Surely you're jaded and tired. And I think one of the worst things you come across in our world are jaded planners who've seen it all before. And so I'm interested in the idea about how you reposition age as wisdom or experience as wisdom, as opposed to jaundiced, Huntington, who sits in the corner rocking backwards and forwards and saying it was better in my day. Because I think there are some amazing people in our industry who do the whole all of this stuff is nonsense. We need to get back to another time or another, when things were clearer, more honest, more straightforward. Bob Hoffman's a good example of that, I think, to a certain extent. Dave Trott, and I have huge respect. I just don't want to be the old bloke in the corner telling you that it was better, 10 years ago. And so I think that's the thing I meditate on constantly right now. Is there is surely a value in wisdom. After all, we're about to head into this mother of all recessions, and I've worked in the industry across 4 recessionary periods. Like, I think there's some value in that, without being that awful voice of we tried that in 1986 and it didn't work, so we're certainly. Do you know what? I don't know, Neil. I said you're a lot younger than I am, but how to get old in advertising. I mean, I look at John Hegarty and I think, oh my goodness, there's somebody who just stays relevant or stayed relevant. Anyway, that's the thing I meditate on a little bit.
Brilliant. I mean, do you know what I think? One of the most underrated qualities, I think, particularly when you're recruiting people, you're hiring people, is just enthusiasm. People who just have so much energy and enthusiasm for the job and for the industry, and that sort of willingness to just explore, I think, is just so valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a cliche, but it is about curiosity. I think it's. One of the things I've often said is planners don't know that strategists don't know they're right. I mean, we're sort of paid to be right. I get that, but it seems to me that business leaders, account handlers, the CEO function, they're clear, they're right, they're clear, they're right, and their job actually is in, even if they're not right, make what they've decided right. I mean, that seems to be, and that's why I know that however long I last in this industry, or however far I progress, I cannot do that CEO thing. You know, make a decision, then make it the right decision. I think that with strategists, actually, you're constantly going, I might be wrong about this, and what's good about that is it keeps you alive to, there might be another answer. Somebody else might have something better to say. I don't have the monopoly of wisdom here, and I think that curiosity. Somebody said to me the other day on Twitter, I did a little kind of, like, so sort of anodyne what I said, but it had some meaning to it. I was talking about, I thought that maybe right now what agencies and clients needed from strategists was clarity, not cleverness. And it shows up in a slightly sort of aphoristic, ha ha ha, you know. But I sort of, it's because I've been in meeting after meeting after meeting, and I could see that only real value I was providing was I think we should do this. Like, it was what I realized I was doing, I wasn't bringing clever ideas and new insights. And I think, you know, this period of time where we've been often starved of stimulation is tough for that side of our brains. But what we in a world that's very confusing, being super clear. And somebody said and humility, like, and I was kind of going, I think they were probably having a pop at me, and where I got to is no, I think that actually what I'm not being paid to be humble, what I'm being paid to do is to be clear. But humility is enduring trait of a good strategist, because otherwise you know, the number of people that disappear somewhere because they believe they alone have the answer. I think maybe that's and maybe that comes back to a bit of strong opinions lightly held. You have to have strong and clear opinions, but maybe it is the ability to kind of go, but there might be another solution. John Planner, who very much my mentor at HHCL, you know, he used to write briefs where it would say a potential strategy. Like, the brief itself was so humble. This guy called John Leach, but you know, like, it was literally, I'm going to put my neck on the line intellectually because I think it's this. But you know, I'm going to give myself a get out, or at least I'm going to give you a get out, which says I'm going to be intellectually courageous, but it might be wrong, and you might have a better way of solving this problem. So this is a potential strategy, not the strategy. Anyway, that's a bit of a ramble, but I think that curiosity is important.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, it goes back to like where we started. Nothing is unsolvable, but then strong opinions likely held. So that's really nice. I think we're out of time. But thanks for that, Richard. That has been awesome. Really good to get your perspective on those 5 questions. So thank you very much for being part of Google Firestarters.
Thank you, Neil. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
No problem. And for those who don't know Richard's blog, Ad Literate, it's a fantastic blog. Go read it now. And been going, I think, since 2005. So my thanks again to Richard. And look out for more episodes of Google Firestarters to come. Thank you.